Millionaire disguises himself as a beggar to reunite with his mother after 30 years. Grant William Harrison trembled as he tore his expensive clothes with his own hands. He had made the hardest decision of his life, temporarily leaving his mansion in Beverly Hills to dress as a beggar and search for the mother he had abandoned 3 decades earlier. His last conversation with Mrs. Martha had been a terrible argument. At 20, tired of the poverty on the outskirts of New York City, he had screamed words that now burned inside him like hot iron. He had promised to come back rich to get her, but success blinded him, and the years passed like leaves in the wind. Now, at 50, Grant William owned one of the largest construction companies in the state. He had money to buy anything, except the peace he had lost when he accidentally learned that his mother was living on the streets of the Bronx. The information had reached him through an old neighbor who works at one of his construction sites. The first hours in disguise were a brutal shock to his senses, accustomed to luxury. The smell of the streets, the coldness of the stairs, the hunger biting at his stomach. Everything was new and frightening. His manicured hands, hidden under dirty gloves, trembled every time someone walked by looking at him with contempt. It was on the corner of Factory Road that he saw her for the first time after so long. An elderly woman with white hair covered by a yellowish scarf, selling homemade food in dented aluminum pots. His heart almost leaped out of his chest when he recognized those brown eyes that had rocked him during his childhood. Mrs. Martha Miller, now 72 years old, had a face marked by hardship, but she kept the same sweetness in her smile that he held in his memory. She handed out plates of seasoned cornbread and pot pies to those who had a few coins, but she also offered food to those who had nothing. Grant William stood still at a safe distance, watching every move of the woman who had given him life. She wore a torn apron over a faded blouse, and her shoes were so old he could see her toes through the holes. The sight tore at his chest like a sharp blade. When he finally gathered the courage to approach, she looked at him with that infinite kindness he knew so well. There was no sign of recognition in her eyes, only the natural compassion of a mother seeing another street child in need of help. "Hey, dear," she said in a soft voice, "are you hungry? I have some warm cornbread here." Grant William couldn't answer right away. Emotion gripped his throat like an invisible hand. He just nodded, trying to hold back the tears that kept welling up. 30 years of longing exploded in his chest at that moment. "Don't worry about money, my son," Mrs. Martha continued, serving him a generous plate. "Everyone goes through hard times in life. What matters is not losing hope." Her words echoed in his mind like an echo from the past. It was exactly what she used to say when he was a child, complaining about poverty. The irony of the situation hit him like a punch to the stomach. He had become a millionaire but had lost the only wealth that truly mattered. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. "Thank you very much, Ma'am," he managed to murmur, disguising his voice to sound rougher. "You're very kind." "Kind nothing," she replied with a smile. "I'm a mother, and a mother always takes care of her children, even when they're not her own blood." Grant William almost gave himself away at that moment. His mother's words were like needles piercing his guilty heart. He ate in silence, savoring not just the food but every second by her side. It was the first food that had real taste in 3 decades. "My name is Martha," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "And you? What's your name, dear?" He hesitated for a moment, searching for a name that wouldn't raise suspicion. "William," he finally replied, using only part of his real name. "William Harrison." "William," she repeated with affection. "Beautiful name. You know, I had a son with that name. Grant William. I don't know where he is now, but I always pray for him." The shock was so intense that Grant William almost dropped the plate from his trembling hands. She spoke of him with love, even after so much abandonment. The guilt weighed on his shoulders like an entire mountain. "He must be doing fine, Mrs. Martha," he managed to say, struggling to control his choked voice. "Sons always come back home." "Oh, I hope so, my son. I hope so." She sighed deeply, gazing at the horizon. "He left here promising he was going to get rich and lift me out of this life. But that was so long ago. Sometimes I think something might have happened to him." Grant Williams swallowed hard. The genuine concern in her voice was like acid burning his insides. She didn't feel anger. She held no resentment, only unconditional love and endless longing. "I'm sure he thinks about you every day," he said, each word being a disguised confession. "Sometimes life complicates things, but a son's love for his mother never dies." Mrs. Martha looked at him with curiosity, as if something in his words had struck a familiar chord in her heart. "You speak well, William. Seems like you've had some schooling." Grant Williams' heart raced. He needed to be more careful. "I picked up a little here and there, Mrs. Martha. Life on the streets teaches you a lot." "That's true," she agreed. "But you don't seem like you've been on the streets very long. Your hands, they're different." Grant William looked down, realizing that his dirty gloves didn't completely hide the lack of calluses and scars, typical of someone who's lived on the streets for years. He needed to think fast. "I worked in an office before I lost everything," he invented, mixing truth with lies. "I haven't been in this situation for long." "Ah, I see," she said with understanding. "Life can change overnight, can't it? I myself once had a home, a stable family. But things happen." "What happened to you?" asked Grant William, genuinely curious about her life over the past 30 years. Mrs. Martha was silent for a moment, absently stirring the pan of cornbread. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of decades of suffering. "After my son left, I was alone in the little house where he was born. I tried to get by cleaning houses and doing sewing, but the money was never enough. The rent fell behind. The bills piled up." She paused, wiping her eyes with her shirt cuff. Grant William felt as if knives were being driven into his chest. Every word she spoke revealed the suffering his departure had caused. "One day, the landlord evicted me. I had nowhere to go, no family, nothing. I spent a few years moving from one shack to another, depending on the kindness of neighbors. But you know how it is, right? No one can carry someone else's weight forever." "And how did you end up here?" he asked, his voice nearly fading with emotion. "About 10 years ago, a lady who sold food on this corner got sick. She taught me the recipes, gave me the pots, and I kept the business going. It's not much, but it's enough to live on, and I can help people like you." The simplicity and dignity of his mother impressed him deeply. Even in misery, she had found a way to serve others. It was the complete opposite of him, who had built his empire thinking only of himself. "Did you ever try to find your son?" asked Grant William, needing to know. "Oh, my dear, you think I didn't try?" she replied with a sad smile. "In the early years, I would go all the way to downtown to search. I asked everyone if they knew a young man named Grant William Harrison, but New York City is so big, and I'm just a simple woman who can barely read." Grant William felt a lump in his throat. While he was building his business empire, using every resource possible to grow in the market, his mother was searching for him on foot through the enormous streets of the metropolis. After a few years, a neighbor told me she'd seen a businessman in the paper with a similar name. But when she showed me the photo, I didn't recognize him. The man was wearing a suit, hair nicely cut, looked like an important person. It couldn't be my boy. The world spun around Grant William. She had seen him in the newspapers, but hadn't recognized him. He had changed so much that his own mother couldn't identify him in photographs. "What was your son like when he left home?" he asked, masochistically wanting to hear more. "A skinny young man with curly hair, always with that mischievous smile," she said, her face lighting up at the memory. "He was stubborn, proud, wanted to be rich at any cost. But he had a good heart. He always said he was going to give me a better life." "And do you believe he'll come back?" Mrs. Martha was silent for a long moment, looking at her calloused hands. "You know, William, after so many years, I don't know anymore. Sometimes I think he must have his own family now, his own problems. He can't be tied to the past because of an old mother." "But would you like him to come back?" Grant William insisted. "Of course I would," she answered without hesitation. "He's my only child. Even if he showed up here right now after all this time, I'd hug him and ask if he was okay. A mother doesn't hold a grudge against her son no matter what happened. Tears finally escaped Grant Williams' eyes, but he quickly wiped them away, pretending it was sweat. His mother's words of anticipated forgiveness were like balm and poison at the same time. They soothed his guilt but intensified his remorse. "You're an incredible mother," he managed to say. "Your son doesn't know how lucky he is." "We're all someone's child, William," she replied wisely, "and we all deserve a second chance." At that moment, Grant William made a decision. He wouldn't reveal his identity right away. He needed to better understand her situation, get to know her current life, and above all, he needed to prove to himself that he deserved the unconditional forgiveness she offered. "Mrs. Martha," he said, "would you mind if I came back tomorrow? I'm new to this neighborhood and don't know anyone." "Of course, my dear. Come back whenever you want, and if you need a place to sleep, there's a tarp behind St. Joseph's Church. Father Francis lets the homeless stay there." Grant William thanked her and walked away, his heart weighing a ton. For the first time in decades, he wouldn't return to his luxurious mansion. He would spend the night out in the open, trying to understand the life his mother led while he slept in silk sheets. The night was the longest of his life. The cold cut through his inadequate clothing, the hard ground hurt his unaccustomed back, and the noises of the street kept him in a constant state of alert. But what tormented him most was the echo of his mother's words. A mother doesn't hold a grudge against her son. When the sun rose, Grant William was more determined than ever. He would return every day to Mrs. Martha's corner. He would learn about her life, earn her trust, and maybe one day find the courage to reveal the truth. But first, he needed to become convincing in the role of William, the man of the streets, and that meant learning to live in the skin of someone he never imagined he could be. During the first few days, Grant William made several mistakes that almost revealed his true identity. He used overly complicated words, showed knowledge that a homeless person shouldn't have, and his manners still carried traces of the refined upbringing he'd received over the years. Mrs. Martha, however, was too observant not to notice the inconsistencies. During a conversation, while he helped her organize the pots and pans, she commented, "William, you have a knack for organizing things. Seems like you've worked at a big company before." "No, Mrs. Martha," he lied quickly. "I just learned to be organized because we can't waste anything when we have little." She murmured, not seeming entirely convinced. "And your family, you never talk about them." Grant William felt cold sweat running down his back. He needed to invent a convincing story, but not one so elaborate that he'd contradict himself later. "I don't have a family," he said simply. "I grew up in an orphanage." "Oh, my dear," Mrs. Martha exclaimed with genuine compassion. "How sad. That's why you understand so much about loneliness." The irony of her words cut Grant William like a sharp blade. He had grown up with the unconditional love of a mother, but had thrown it all away for greed. Now he was lying about being an orphan to the very woman who had raised him with such care. "That's why you're so important to me," he said, letting a little of the truth slip out. "It's been a while since someone took care of me like a mother." Mrs. Martha smiled tenderly and ran her hand through his disheveled hair. "Everyone needs affection, William. And you seem like a good young man. You remind me of someone—" Grant William's heart almost stopped. "Remind you of who?" "I'm not sure," she replied thoughtfully. "Your eyes. There's something familiar. Maybe it's just an old woman's impression." Grant William quickly looked away, pretending to be interested in the pots and pans. He was treading on dangerous ground. He needed to be more careful. During the following weeks, he developed a strict routine. He woke up early before anyone could see him leaving his makeshift hiding spot behind the church and went to the corner where Mrs. Martha set up her little business. He helped carry the pots and pans, organized the space, and chatted with the regular customers. That's how he met the other people who made up the small community around his mother's food stand. There was Mr. Arthur, a retired man who had coffee there every day while telling stories about when he worked at the factory. Mrs. Gladys, who sold homemade sweets on the lower corner, and CJ, a young unemployed man who did odd painting jobs whenever an opportunity came up. Everyone treated Mrs. Martha with respect and affection. It was evident that she had earned a special place in that community, not only as a merchant, but as a kind of mother to everyone who needed support. "Mrs. Martha is a blessing in our lives," Mr. Arthur commented one day, while Grant William helped him carry some heavy bags. "When my wife got sick, she made food and brought it to my house every day. She wouldn't accept payment." "She's really very kind," Grant William agreed, his chest swelling with pride for the woman who had raised him. "And you know what I admire most about her," Mr. Arthur continued. "Even with all the hardship, she never lost hope. She always talks about her son with so much love. She still expects him to come back to this day." Grant William swallowed hard. What happened to her son? A young man wanted to try his luck elsewhere. He left here many years ago, promising he'd come back rich. Mrs. Martha believed it so much that she even saved money for when he arrived. "She saved money?" Grant William asked, alarmed. "Yes, can you imagine? The woman barely has enough to eat, but every month she sets aside a few dollars in a little tin. She says it's for the day Grant William comes back. She wanted to have something to offer her son." The revelation struck Grant William like lightning. While he had been piling up millions, his mother had been starving herself to save coins, thinking of his return. The magnitude of his unconscious cruelty left him nauseated. "How long has it been since he left?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Must be about 30 years, Mr. Arthur replied. "Martha was still young then, full of dreams. She believed her son would really make it rich and come back for her. Poor woman." "Why, poor woman?" "Oh, William, do you think after 30 years that young man still remembers his mother? He's probably out there living his life with his own family, his own problems. Rich folks don't care about poor people, right?" Grant William fell silent, the indirect accusation striking his guilty conscience dead center. Mr. Arthur was right. He had become exactly the kind of person who looked down on the poor and forgot his roots. That night, Grant William couldn't sleep. The image of his mother saving coins for him for 3 decades tormented him. He decided he needed to see that little tin can with his own eyes, even if it meant invading her privacy. The next day, while helping Mrs. Martha organize her things in the late afternoon, he casually commented, "Mrs. Martha, do you live far from here?" "No, dear. I live over on the alley in a very simple little house. Why do you ask?" "Just curious. Must be nice to have a little corner of your own." "Oh, William, home is home, right? Even if it's humble. Want to see? I can show you where it is in case you ever need anything." Grant William's heart raced. She was offering exactly what he wanted, but so naturally and generously that guilt consumed him. "If it's not too much trouble for you." "Not trouble at all. Let's go." The walk to Mrs. Martha's house was one of the most painful experiences of Grant William's life. They passed dirt roads, clogged sewers, wooden shacks and recycled materials stacked on top of one another. It was even poorer than the neighborhood where he had grown up. "It's here," she said, pointing at a tiny building of exposed brick. "It's not much, but it's my home." Grant William looked at the house that barely had 160 square feet. One room that served as both living room and bedroom, a tiny bathroom, and a kitchen that was more of a narrow hallway. Everything was very clean and organized, but with a heartbreaking poverty. "Come in. Make yourself at home," Mrs. Martha said, turning on a dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling. It was then that Grant William saw the photos. In every corner of the small living room, there were images of him at different stages of life: child, teenager, young adult. Photos she had kept all these years, like a shrine dedicated to the memory of her absent son. "Those photos are of my Grant William," she explained, noticing his interest. "I keep them all here. Sometimes I look at them and imagine how he must be now." Grant William approached a photo where he appeared at 19, right before leaving home. It was an image of him smiling, arms around his mother's shoulders, both happy in front of their old house. The difference between that hopeful young man and the bitter man he had become was shocking. "He seems like a good young man," he commented, his voice choking. "He was," Mrs. Martha confirmed with pride. "Stubborn, but with a good heart. He always protected me from the rude neighbors, always said he was going to give me a better life." "And do you believe he kept his promise?" Mrs. Martha was silent for a moment, looking at the photo with a melancholic expression. "You know, William, I believe he tried. But sometimes life doesn't go the way we plan. Maybe he ran into difficulties. Maybe he started a family and couldn't come back. I don't judge my son." His mother's emotional maturity left Grant Williams speechless. Even abandoned, even living in poverty, she held no grudge and made no demands. It was unconditional love in its purest form. "Would you like some coffee?" she offered. "It's nothing special, but it's warm." While Mrs. Martha prepared the coffee, Grant William noticed every detail of the house. He noticed she had turned a drawer into a kind of makeshift altar, with more photos of him and a candle that seemed to be lit regularly. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. That's when he saw the little tin that Mr. Arthur had mentioned. An old cocoa powder tin decorated with faded red ribbon was carefully placed beside the photos. Through a small opening in the lid, he could see some coins and crumpled bills. The sight of that makeshift piggy bank, with the savings his mother had been putting aside for decades thinking of him, was the last straw. Grant William ran out of the house, making up an excuse about feeling unwell, and went to cry hidden in a dark alley. All night long, he wrestled with conflicting feelings. Part of him wanted to confess everything right away, hug his mother, and ask for forgiveness. Another part feared that the revelation would destroy the image she had of him, turning love into disappointment. The next day, Grant William returned to Mrs. Martha's corner more determined than ever to earn her forgiveness before revealing his identity. He needed to prove he deserved the unconditional love she offered. "Good morning, Mrs. Martha," he greeted, forcing a smile. "Good morning, my dear. Are you feeling better? You left kind of strange yesterday." "I am, thank you. It was just a passing spell." Over the following days, Grant William devoted himself intensely to helping his mother in every way he could. He carried the heavy pots, organized the ingredients, talked to customers to attract more business, and even suggested improvements to the stand. "Grant, you've got a good head for business," Mrs. Martha commented one afternoon. "Ever since you started helping me, sales have improved a lot." "It's just a matter of organization, Mrs. Martha," he replied modestly. "It's not just that. You understand numbers, how to deal with people. Where did you learn all that?" Grant William swallowed hard. He was being too careless, letting his business skills show. "Life, Mrs. Martha. When you have to survive, you learn a little bit of everything." "True," she agreed, but her gaze remained thoughtful. "You remind me more and more of someone. I can't get it out of my head." Grant William's heart raced. "It must be your imagination, Mrs. Martha." "Maybe, but your gestures, the way you talk when you get emotional, it reminds me of my son when he was little." Grant William quickly changed the subject, but he realized he was walking a fine line. His mother was more observant than he had imagined. It was during the third week of their time together that the first incident happened that almost revealed his identity. Grant William was helping serve when a well-dressed man approached the stand. It was someone he recognized immediately, Spencer Vance, a business rival who frequently showed up at social events. "Excuse me," Spencer said to Mrs. Martha, "could you sell me a soda?" "Of course, dear," she replied, grabbing a cold can. Grant William quickly ducked behind the makeshift counter, pretending to look for something. His heart pounded unevenly as they heard the conversation above his head. "Thank you," Spencer said, paying for the soda. "This neighborhood has changed a lot in recent years, hasn't it?" "Oh, yes," Mrs. Martha agreed. "A lot of new people moving in. Some of them don't even seem to be from around here." Grant William froze. Could she be referring to him? When Spencer finally walked away, Grant William got up slowly, his legs shaking. That had been too close. "Are you okay, William?" asked Mrs. Martha, concerned. "You look very pale." "I'm fine, just felt a little dizzy," he lied. "Did you know that man?" The direct question caught him off guard. "No. Why do you ask?" "Because when he arrived, you hid. It seemed like you were afraid of him." Grant William realized he needed to come up with a convincing explanation quickly. "It's just, I owe money to some people. When I see someone dressed like that, I get scared of being collected from." "Ah, I see," said Mrs. Martha with understanding. Debts are a terrible burden indeed. But don't worry. As long as you're here with me, you're protected." The maternal protection she offered, unaware that she was protecting the very son who had abandoned her, moved Grant William deeply. He had to step away for a few minutes to keep from crying in front of her. The incident with Spencer Vance was a red alert for Grant William. He needed to be more careful, because the business world in New York City wasn't all that big. There was always the risk of running into someone he knew. He started wearing an old cap and sunglasses he'd found in the trash, slightly changing his appearance. He also began observing customers before approaching them, identifying any familiar face that could pose a danger. But what worried him most was Mrs. Martha's growing suspicion. She watched him more closely, asked more direct questions, and several times caught him staring at her son's photos with a strange expression. "William," she said one day, as they were organizing things late in the afternoon, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Mrs. Martha." "Are you sure you don't have family anywhere? No parents, no siblings, no one?" Grant William felt cold sweat running down his back. "Why do you ask?" "Because sometimes you talk like someone who had a mother who loved you very much. Your words, they carry the tenderness of someone who has known a mother's love." Mrs. Martha's keen perception made him more and more nervous. It was as if she were putting together a puzzle and the pieces were starting to fit. "Everyone wishes they'd had a caring mother, Mrs. Martha," he deflected. "Sometimes we invent memories to fill the void." "Maybe," she murmured, but she didn't seem convinced. That night, Grant William made a risky decision. He needed to know what his mother truly thought about him, what her real feelings were after all this time. He decided to ask directly, risking awakening even more suspicion. The next day, as they were having coffee together before starting work, he brought it up. "Mrs. Martha, can I ask you a question about your son?" "Of course, dear. What do you want to know?" "If he showed up here today after all this time, would you forgive him?" Mrs. Martha stopped stirring the sugar into her coffee and looked directly at him. "Why do you ask that, William?" Grant William felt he had been too forward. "It's just, sometimes I think about looking for my family, but I'm afraid I won't be well received." "Ah, I see," she said, relaxing a little. "Look, about my Grant William, I can tell you one thing. No matter what happened, no matter how much time has passed, he's my son. True mothers don't have an expiration date on their love. Even if he had done bad things? Even then. Of course, I'd be sad if I found out he did something wrong, but my role as a mother is to help him be better, not to condemn him. And what if he had gotten rich and forgotten about you?" The question hit deep, and Grant William saw the pain pass through his mother's eyes like a shadow. "This is my biggest concern," she admitted softly. "Not that he became rich, that I wish with all my heart, but that he became a different person, someone I wouldn't recognize anymore." "Different how?" "Cold, greedy, with no time for feelings. I'm afraid success has changed his heart." Grant William swallowed hard. That was exactly what had happened to him. "But even so, you would forgive him?" Mrs. Martha was silent for a long moment, looking at her own calloused hands. "You know, William, forgiveness isn't a matter of choice. It's a matter of love. If I truly love my son, I forgive him regardless of what he's done. Forgiveness is to free my heart, not to justify his actions." The depth of his mother's words left Grant William speechless. She had matured emotionally during those years of suffering, becoming a woman of rare wisdom. "But what if he didn't deserve forgiveness?" he insisted, testing the limits of maternal love. "William, none of us deserve forgiveness. Forgiveness is a gift we give out of love, not a reward someone earns through merit." At that moment, Grant William felt he didn't deserve to have such an extraordinary mother. The woman before him had become infinitely greater than the person he remembered from childhood. During the following days, he devoted himself even more intensely to caring for her. He arrived earlier, stayed later, carried more weight, and even began discreetly contributing money to buy better ingredients. "William," Mrs. Martha said one morning, "where are you getting the money to help so much with the groceries?" Grant William froze. He had been too careless. "I found some night loading jobs," he invented quickly. "Loading jobs? With those hands?" She took his hands and examined them closely. "These hands have never carried weight, William. They're too smooth, too well cared for." Grant William pulled his hands away quickly, his heart racing. "The gloves protect quite a bit, Mrs. Martha." She murmured, clearly not believing the explanation. From that day on, Grant William noticed that Mrs. Martha began testing him more directly. She asked specific questions about life on the streets, asked for details about places a homeless person should know, observed his reactions to situations that should be familiar to someone in his supposed condition. "William," she said one day, "do you know the shelter on Fifth Avenue?" "I do," he lied, not knowing if such a shelter actually existed. "Oh, that's great. How's the food there lately? Did it improve after they changed the cook?" Grant William realized it was a test. "Actually, Mrs. Martha, it's been a while since I've been there. I prefer to stay around here." "I see," she said, but her gaze was increasingly investigative. The tension between them grew day after day. Grant William knew he was treading on increasingly dangerous ground, but he couldn't pull away. The need to be close to his mother, to take care of her, to try to make up for all the lost years, was stronger than the fear of being discovered. It was during the 5th week that the second serious incident happened. Grant William was helping Mrs. Martha close up her stand when an elegant woman approached. It was Victoria, his ex-wife. "Excuse me," Victoria said, "do you still have anything to sell?" "I'm really hungry." Grant William bent down again, pretending to be arranging something on the ground. His heart was beating so loudly that he was sure Victoria could hear it. "Of course, dear," Mrs. Martha replied gently. "I have some pot pies that are still warm." As his mother attended to Victoria, Grant William fought against the panic. His ex-wife was just a few feet away, talking to the mother he had hidden from her throughout their entire marriage. "Thank you," said Victoria after buying the pot pies. "Have you been working here long?" "About 10 years now, dear. It's how I make my living." "And this young man," asked Victoria, looking toward Grant William, "is he your helper?" Grant William felt his blood run cold. He kept his head down, hoping the cap and sunglasses would be enough to hide his identity. "He's an angel who came into my life," Mrs. Martha replied warmly. "He helps me with everything. He's like a son to me." The irony of her words hit Grant William like a punch to the gut. His own mother was talking about him as a substitute son in front of the woman he had been married to for 10 years. "It's good to have someone to help," Victoria commented. "That's heavy work for a woman on her own." When Victoria finally walked away, Grant William stayed crouched for a few more minutes, trembling uncontrollably. "William, what's going on?" asked Mrs. Martha, worried. "That's the second time you've hidden when someone well-dressed shows up." "Grant." William stood up slowly, removing his sunglasses to wipe the sweat running down his face. "Mrs. Martha, I need to tell you something," he began, but stopped abruptly when he saw the expression on her face. Mrs. Martha was staring at him, her eyes wide with shock. When he took off his glasses, she saw his face in full for the first time in weeks. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Grant William?" The world stopped for Grant William at that moment. After 5 weeks of charade, after so much planning and care, everything had collapsed in a single second of carelessness. "Mom," was all he managed to say, his voice completely breaking. Mrs. Martha staggered back, bracing herself against the wall of the building behind her. Tears streamed freely down her face as she looked him up and down. "Is it really you?" she asked, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "It's me, Mom, it's me." For a moment that felt like an eternity, they stood looking at each other in silence. 30 years of separation, pain, longing, and regret materialized in the space between them. Then, Mrs. Martha did something Grant William didn't expect. Instead of running to embrace him, she moved even further away. "Why?" she asked, her voice heavy with pain. "Why did you do this to me?" Grant William felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "Mom, I can explain." "Explain what?" "That you watched me for weeks like I was an animal in a zoo. That you lied to me every day, that you played with my feelings." The pain in Mrs. Martha's voice was worse than any scream. It was the deep disappointment of a mother who had been betrayed by her own son. It wasn't like that, Mom. I wanted to find you. I wanted to be close to you. Then why didn't you come as my son? Why did you have to lie? Grant William tried to step closer, but she raised her hand, signaling for him to stop. Mom, please let me explain. No, she said firmly, wiping her tears with the cuff of her blouse. Not now. I need time to process this. Mom, I love you. I've always loved you. That's why I came back. 30 years, Grant William, she said, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. 30 years I waited. And when you finally come back, you come in hiding, lying, deceiving me. I was afraid, Mom. Afraid you wouldn't forgive me. And you thought deceiving me would be better. Grant William had no answer to that question. Everything he had planned, all the justifications he had prepared, seemed pathetic in the face of his mother's evident pain. I'm leaving now, said Mrs. Martha, beginning to pack up her things. I don't want to talk about this today. Mum, please. Grant William, she interrupted him, using his full name the way she did when he was a child and had done something wrong. You owe me at least the respect of accepting that I need time. Grant William nodded silently, tears streaming down his face. He watched as his mother gathered her pots and utensils with mechanical movements, avoiding looking directly at him. When she finished and began to walk away, Grant William called out, Mum, I'll be here tomorrow, and the day after that, every day until you want to talk to me. Mrs. Martha stopped without turning around. And what if I never want to talk? Then I'll keep waiting. She stood still for a few more seconds, then continued walking without looking back. Grant William was left alone on the empty corner, surrounded by the ghosts of 5 weeks of lies and 30 years of regret. For the first time since he had begun this journey, he questioned whether he had made the right decision. The night was even worse than the first. Grant William couldn't close his eyes for even a minute. He stayed awake, going over every word of the conversation, every expression on his mother's face, trying to understand if he had destroyed the possibility of reconciliation forever. When the sun rose, he was more determined than ever. He would go to the corner and wait. If Mrs. Martha didn't show up, he would wait anyway. If she showed up and didn't want to talk to him, he would respect that. But he would stay there, proving that his words had value. At 7 in the morning, Grant William was on the corner. At 8, he was still there. At 9, he began to worry that she wouldn't come anymore. At 10, he was about to give up when he saw her approaching. Mrs. Martha carried her pots as always, but her face showed signs of a sleepless night. She set up her stand in silence, completely ignoring her son's presence. Good morning, Mom, Grant William said softly. She didn't respond. Can I help you with anything? Silence. Grant William stood there at a respectful distance, watching as she organized everything by herself. When the first customers arrived, he moved back a little more, but stayed within sight. Mr. Arthur was the first to notice the tension in the air. Mrs. Martha, are you doing okay today? You're very quiet. I'm fine, Mr. Arthur, she replied without much enthusiasm. And William, I didn't see him helping you today. Mrs. Martha glanced briefly in Grant William's direction. William is no longer my helper. Oh, that's a shame. He seemed like a good young man. Did something happen? People aren't always what they seem, Mr. Arthur. Grant William heard the exchange and felt each syllable like a stab. But he stayed there, determined to prove that this time he wouldn't abandon his mother. The day passed slowly. Grant William didn't move from the corner, even when it started to rain late in the afternoon. Mrs. Martha watched him discreetly, but didn't address a single word to him. When it was time to close up, she put away her things by herself, silently refusing any help. Before leaving, she stopped near him. How long are you going to stay there? She asked, still avoiding looking directly at him. As long as it takes, Mom. And your company, your business, your rich life? The question carried a bitterness that cut deep. None of that matters to me anymore. I don't believe you, she said simply, and continued walking. Grant William spent the second night out in the open, but this time it wasn't out of some romantic choice to live like the poor. It was because he was afraid of leaving and coming back the next day without finding his mother. On the third day, Mrs. Martha showed up for work again. Again, she ignored Grant William. But he noticed that she had prepared extra food, and when no one was looking, she left a plate near the spot where he was sitting. It was a small gesture, but it represented hope. She still cared about him even though she was furious. For the rest of the week, the pattern repeated. Mrs. Martha worked in silence. Grant William waited patiently, and small gestures of maternal care appeared discreetly. A glass of water left near him, a napkin when it rained, enough food for two even when she insisted it was only for one. The regular customers began to notice the strange dynamic between them. "Mrs. Martha," asked Mrs. Gladys, "that young man is still there. What does he want?" "I don't know, Mrs. Gladys. Strange people have been showing up around here. But he doesn't seem dangerous. He just stays there, quiet, not bothering anyone." "Looks can be deceiving," replied Mrs. Martha dryly. Grant William overheard the conversations and understood that his mother was protecting his privacy, but also expressing her frustration through the indirect comments. It was on the 8th day since the discovery that the first real conversation happened. Grant William was sitting on the curb when he saw two men approaching Mrs. Martha with aggressive behavior. They were young men from the neighborhood he didn't know, but who clearly had extortionate intentions. "Hey, Grandma," said one of them. "How much do you make a day here?" "That's none of your business," replied Mrs. Martha firmly. But Grant William noticed the fear in her voice. "Of course it's our business. You use our corner, you got to pay a fee." "What fee?" "I've been working here for 10 years and I've never paid a fee to anyone." "Well, Grandma, things have changed now, you got to pay." Grant William stood up instinctively, walking toward the commotion. He had completely forgotten that his mother was angry with him. He only saw a woman he loved being threatened. "What's the problem here?" he asked, placing himself between the young men and Mrs. Martha. "The problem is, you weren't invited to this conversation," replied one of the young men aggressively. "And the problem is you're bothering this lady," countered Grant William, his posture shifting into something that resembled more the confident businessman than the submissive beggar. "Grant William, don't get involved," said Mrs. Martha behind him, but there was more concern than anger in her voice. "Oh, it's Grant William?" mocked one of the young men. "Pretty name for a beggar." "I am a beggar," said Grant William calmly. "But I won't let anyone mess with someone I respect." The tension grew quickly. The two young men positioned themselves threateningly, and Grant William realized the situation could spiral out of control. That's when Mr. Arthur appeared, accompanied by 3 more men from the neighborhood. "Come on, boys," said Mr. Arthur with authority. "Mrs. Martha has been here longer than you've been alive. Let the woman work in peace." Finding themselves outnumbered, the young men backed off with vague threats about coming back later. When they walked away, Grant William was still trembling from the adrenaline. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked, turning to Mrs. Martha. "I am," she replied, but this time she looked him in the eyes. "Thank you." It was the first direct word she had spoken to him in over a week. "No need to thank me. I will always protect you." "Even when I'm angry with you?" "Especially when you're angry with me." Mrs. Martha was silent for a moment, studying her son's face. "You haven't changed that much," she finally said. "You were always stubborn and protective." "I did change, Mom. I changed for the worse in many ways, but my love for you never changed." "Then why did you stay away for so long?" Grant William sighed deeply. It was the question he knew he would have to answer sooner or later. "Because I became a person who was ashamed to face you. I got rich, Mum, but I lost everything that really mattered along the way. You could have come to get me when you got rich, that's what you promised. I could have, yes, and I should have, but I kept convincing myself that you were better off without me, that I would only bring trouble, that my world didn't match yours. In other words, you were ashamed of me." The direct accusation hit Grant William like a gunshot. "No, Mom, I was never ashamed of you. I was ashamed of myself." Mrs. Martha studied him for a long moment. "And why did you change your mind now?" "Because I finally understood that all the success in the world isn't worth anything if you don't have family to share it with. Because I spent 30 years trying to prove I didn't need you, and all I managed to do was prove the opposite." "And why did you come in secret? Why didn't you knock on my door and say, 'Hi, Mom, I'm back'?" Grant William lowered his head, ashamed. "Because I was afraid you would reject me. I wanted to be sure you still loved me before revealing myself." "Nonsense," said Mrs. Martha firmly. "A mother doesn't stop loving her child, Grant William. She may be disappointed, she may be hurt, but she doesn't stop loving. I know that now, but back then I was so afraid." Mrs. Martha sighed deeply, watching the street traffic. "You hurt me badly with that whole lie," she said finally. "I felt like an idiot, thinking I was taking care of a stranger who was actually my own son testing me. It wasn't a test, Mom, it was need. I needed to be close to you, to take care of you, even if it was in secret. But it was wrong." "It was wrong," admitted Grant William, "and I ask your forgiveness for that." Mrs. Martha was silent for several minutes. Customers kept coming and going. The neighborhood life went on at its normal pace, but for them, time seemed suspended. "Do you really want a second chance?" she asked at last. "More than anything in my life. Then you're going to have to earn it again. The right way this time." Grant William felt a mix of relief and anxiety. "How?" "By telling me the truth about your life, the whole truth, what you did in those 30 years, what kind of person you became, why it took you so long to come back. Even if the truth isn't pretty?" "Especially if it isn't pretty," said Mrs. Martha firmly. "I don't want any more lies between us, Grant William. If we're going to try again, it has to be with total honesty." Grant William took a deep breath. It was the moment he feared, but also the moment he knew was inevitable. "All right, Mom, I'll tell you everything, but it's a long story." "I have time," she said, sitting on a plastic chair behind the stall, "and you owe me those 30 years of explanation." So Grant William began to speak. He told her about how he left home full of dreams and ambitions, how he got his first job at a small construction company, how he learned the business quickly and started climbing the ranks. He talked about how he met partners who taught him that in the business world there was no room for sentimentality, how he gradually convinced himself that showing his humble origins would be a weakness his competitors would exploit. He told her about the first million he made and how it left him drunk with the feeling of power, how he started frequenting social circles where no one talked about simple families or poor childhoods. Mrs. Martha listened in silence, occasionally asking questions that showed she understood the social pressures he had faced. "And did you get married?" she asked when he paused. "I did, Mom, to a woman named Victoria. She is from a wealthy family. I never told her about my origins. Not even about me." Grant William swallowed hard. "Not even about you." The pain that passed through Mrs. Martha's eyes was like a knife to the chest. "She told you that you were an orphan?" "Yes." "And she believed it?" "She did. She never questioned it much. Rich people sometimes prefer not to know details about the past of those who come from nothing." "Are you still married?" "No. We divorced 5 years ago. She said I was too cold, that I didn't show real feelings." "And did you?" Grant William thought for a moment. "No. I think that by hiding my true origins, I ended up hiding my ability to truly love as well." Mrs. Martha nodded thoughtfully. "And children? Did you have children?" "We didn't have any. Victoria wanted them, but I always made up excuses to put it off. Deep down, I think I was afraid of being a father because I had abandoned my own mother." The conversation continued for the rest of the afternoon. Grant William talked about his business successes, about the times he thought about finding her and gave up, about the growing loneliness he felt even surrounded by luxury. "And what made you change your mind now?" Mrs. Martha asked when he finished telling his story. "One of my employees mentioned he had seen a woman selling food on the street who had the same last name as me. He said she always talked about a son named Grant William, who had left a long time ago. And you came looking for her?" "First, I sent a detective to investigate. When he confirmed it was really her, I spent weeks thinking about what to do." "That's why you decided to come in disguise?" "I decided to come in disguise because I wanted to be sure she was the mother I remembered, and I wanted to see if there was still love in her heart after so much abandonment." Mrs. Martha was silent for a long time, processing everything she had heard. "Grant William," she said finally, You've made terrible mistakes. You abandoned me, denied my existence, built a life based on lies." Grant William hung his head, preparing for the worst. "But," she continued, "you were also very young when you left here, and the world out there is cruel to those who come from humble beginnings. I understand the pressures you faced. So you forgive me?" "I forgive you, but I don't forget, and forgiving doesn't mean we'll go back to the way things were. You're going to have to earn my trust again." "I'm willing to do anything. Anything. Anything, Mrs. Martha looked at him with a gleam in her eyes that he hadn't seen in decades. "Then I want you to show me who you are now. Not the businessman, not the rich man, not the guilty son. I want to meet the Grant William of today. How can I do that? By helping out here at the stand, for real this time. No lies, no disguises, just being yourself. But what if people find out who I am?" "So what?" Mrs. Martha asked simply. "Are you ashamed to work with your mother?" The question hit Grant William square in the chest. He realized he was still thinking in terms of protecting his social image. "No, Mom. It would be an honor to work with you." "Then that's what we're going to do. You're going to work with me here. Meet the people in the neighborhood, understand what real life is like. And I'm going to get to know who you've become." Grant William felt an enormous weight lift from his shoulders. "And if I let you down again?" "Then you leave and never come back," Mrs. Martha said firmly. "This is your last chance, Grant William. There won't be another." "I understand and I accept the conditions." "Then let's start over," she said, extending her hand. "Nice to meet you, Grant William Harrison. I'm your mother, Martha Miller." Grant William shook her hand, tears streaming down his face. "Nice to see you again, Mom." That's how the second phase of Grant William's return began. No disguises, no lies, just a son trying to win back the love and trust of the mother he had abandoned. The next day, Grant William showed up on the corner wearing simple but clean clothes, no disguises. Some regular customers found the change odd, but Mrs. Martha simply introduced him. "Everyone, this is my son, Grant William. He's going to be working with me from now on." The simplicity of the announcement contrasted with the complexity of the situation. Some neighbors whispered among themselves. Others asked direct questions, and Grant William answered with the honesty he had promised his mother. "Mrs. Martha's son?" asked Mr. Arthur, surprised. "But weren't you out on the streets?" "It was a complicated situation, Mr. Arthur. I was away for a long time, and when I came back I had a hard time getting close to my mother." "Ah, I see," said the older man wisely. "Sometimes we complicate things that could be simple, don't we?" During the first few weeks of working openly alongside his mother, Grant William faced several challenges. He had to learn to deal with the neighbors' curious questions about where he'd been all that time, had to adapt to the pace of manual labor after decades behind a desk, and above all had to prove to Mrs. Martha that he was truly committed to changing. "Your hands are getting better," she commented one day, noticing the calluses beginning to form on his fingers. "It hurts less than the first time," admitted Grant William. "First time?" Grant William realized he'd slipped up again. "When I was a kid and helped you at the street markets." "Oh, you remember that." "I remember almost everything from my childhood, Mum. No matter how hard I tried to forget during all those years." Mrs. Martha smiled tenderly. "And what else do you remember?" "I remember you telling me stories before bed. I remember Sundays when we'd go to the park and you'd bring sandwiches wrapped in newspaper. I remember how you protected me from the older boys who wanted to beat me up." "You were always a bit of a know-it-all," she said affectionately. "You talked too fancy for kids your age, and you always defended me even when I was wrong. That's just how mothers are. We hope our kids do the right thing, but we keep loving them even when they mess up." Conversations like that became part of their daily routine. As they worked side by side, Mrs. Martha told him about her life during the 30 years of separation, and Grant William shared his own experiences, always with total honesty. "Mom," he said one day, "I want to show you where I live now." "Where you live?" "In a mansion in Beverly Hills. I want you to see my house." Mrs. Martha was silent for a moment. "What for?" "So, you can better understand my life. And because I want you to come live with me." The offer caught Mrs. Martha by surprise. "Live with you?" "Yes, the house is big. You'd have your own bedroom, your own living room. You could have comfort after so much hardship." Grant William, she said patiently, do you think I want your house? It's not about wanting. It's about what's fair. You spent 30 years struggling because of me. Now I can offer you a better life. Mrs. Martha stopped stirring the pot and looked directly at him. Son, you still haven't understood anything. Understood what, Mom? I don't want your rich life. I don't want your mansion. I don't want anything you got out there. Grant William was confused. But why? You deserve comfort. I want you, Grant William. Just you. Your presence, your company, your affection. Nothing else matters. But you can't keep living in that tiny little house when I can offer you so much better. Yes, I can. And I will. This is my life, my community, my place in the world. If you want to be part of my life, this is where it's going to happen. Mrs. Martha's firmness left Grant William with no arguments. He had automatically assumed that she would want to climb the social ladder, but he was discovering that his mother had found happiness and purpose in simplicity. Then I'll sell the mansion, he said impulsively. Why? To be closer to you. And where will you live? Right here in the neighborhood. I'll buy a little house near yours. Mrs. Martha shook her head. Grant William, you're doing the same thing again. What thing? You're making drastic decisions without thinking them through. That's how you left here 30 years ago, and that's how you want to come back now. Grant William realized she was right. He was acting on impulse again, trying to resolve everything quickly, instead of building gradual, sustainable changes. So, what do you think I should do? You should keep living your life, running your company, taking care of your business, but you should also keep coming here every day working with me, being part of my routine. Wouldn't that be fake? Pretending I'm a manual laborer when I'm actually a businessman? It's not pretending anything, you're both things. You're a businessman and you're my son. One doesn't cancel out the other. Mrs. Martha's wisdom kept surprising Grant William. She had found a way to integrate his two identities without forcing a radical choice. But the people in the neighborhood are going to find out who I am. So what? Are you ashamed of your financial situation? No, but I'm afraid they'll change the way they treat me. Some will change, sure. Others won't, but you'll learn to live with that. Over the following months, Grant William followed his mother's advice. He kept his company, but restructured his schedule so he could spend every morning working at the food stand. He hired a trusted manager to handle business affairs while he was away. At first, it was hard to balance the two worlds. His partners questioned his new routine, some clients found his reduced availability strange, and Grant William had to repeatedly explain that he had reorganized his priorities. "Have you lost your mind?" asked Spencer, his oldest partner, when he found out Grant William was working at a street food stand. "I don't get this phase you're going through." "It's not a phase, Spencer. It's reconnecting with my family." "What family? You always said you were an orphan." Grant William took a deep breath. The time had come to be honest with his business partners, too. "I lied about that. I have a mother, and she's always lived on the outskirts of New York City. I spent 30 years pretending she didn't exist. And now you've decided to play at social work. Now I've decided to be a son." The conversation was tense, but Grant William held his ground. Some partners understood and respected his decision. Others distanced themselves, thinking he was crazy or going through some kind of crisis. Grant William accepted the consequences, prioritizing for the first time something more important than profit. In the neighborhood, the revelation about his financial situation drew mixed reactions. Some neighbors started keeping their distance, others tried to take advantage by asking for favors, and a few, like Mr. Arthur, kept treating him exactly the same as before. "Money doesn't change character, Mr. Arthur philosophized one morning. "A good rich man stays a good rich man, and a crooked rich man stays a crooked rich man. You seem like the good kind." "Thank you, Mr. Arthur. That means a lot to me." "It means nothing. The one who has to approve of you is your mother. The rest of us are just neighbors." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The relationship between Grant William and Mrs. Martha gradually deepened. They had established a comfortable routine of working together, but complete trust was still being built. brick by brick. "Son," she said one day, while they prepared the morning cornbread, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, Mom, anything." "I want to see your company, see where you work, how you work." The suggestion made Grant William nervous. "Why?" "Because I want to better understand this part of your life. If we're going to rebuild our relationship, I need to know who you are in every aspect." Grant William hesitated. His office was a completely different world, sophisticated, competitive, often ruthless. He feared his mother would be shocked or disappointed by certain aspects of the business world. "Mom, maybe it's not a good idea. It's a very different environment." "Grant William," said Mrs. Martha firmly, "either you trust me or you don't. If you want my full acceptance, you need to show me your full life." She was right. Grant William was again trying to protect his image, this time by shielding his mother from his business side. "All right," he agreed. "But I want you to know that not everything you'll see there represents who I am anymore. Let me be the judge of that." The following week, Grant William took Mrs. Martha to visit his company. She wore her best clothes, a simple but clean blouse and a skirt she had bought years ago for special occasions. The contrast when they entered the commercial building on Wall Street was striking. Mrs. Martha looked at everything with curious eyes, but not intimidated ones: the expensive marble, the mirrored elevators, the impeccably dressed receptionists. "It's very beautiful," she commented simply. "You're not impressed?" "I am, but not the kind of impression you think." "What do you mean?" "I'm impressed that my son managed to build all of this, proud of what you've accomplished." Grant William felt a deep emotion. He had expected criticism or discomfort, but his mother showed genuine pride in his achievements. When they reached his office, Mrs. Martha examined everything carefully: the photos on the wall, the business awards, the panoramic view of the city. "Where's my picture?" she asked suddenly. "What?" "Your desk has photos of the awards you've won, but no photos of your family." Grant Williams swallowed hard. "I didn't have any pictures of you here." "Why?" "Because I didn't tell people at work about my background." Mrs. Martha nodded thoughtfully. "And do you intend to keep it that way?" Grant William realized this was another moment of choice. He could keep his life divided into separate compartments, or he could finally integrate all the parts of who he was. "No," he said firmly. "Starting today, I'm going to have pictures of you on my desk. And when people ask, I'll tell them you're my mother, who raised me by herself on the outskirts, and that I'm the man I am today because of her." Mrs. Martha smiled, the first truly radiant smile Grant William had seen on her face since their reunion. During the visit, some employees passed by the office and were introduced to Mrs. Martha. Most reacted with professional politeness, but Grant William noticed curious looks and some surprised expressions. "Your mother?" asked Sandra, his assistant of 15 years after Mrs. Martha left to use the restroom. "Yes, why the surprise?" "It's just that you've never mentioned family. I always thought you were—" "An orphan," Grant William finished. "I lied about that." "Why?" "Because I thought having a poor background would hurt my career." Sandra was silent for a moment. "Can I be honest?" "Of course. I always felt like something was missing in you. A coldness, you know, like you didn't have real emotional connections. Now it makes sense." Sandra's observation struck him deeply. He had spent decades building a professional persona based on emotional detachment, and that had bled into every aspect of his personality. When Mrs. Martha came back, they finished the visit and headed to the parking lot. In the elevator, she asked, "Are you happy here?" "What do you mean?" "At work, doing these things. Are you happy?" Grant William thought honestly before answering. "I don't know if I'm happy or if I just got used to it. For a long time I confused success with happiness. And what's the difference? Success you can measure: money, recognition, power. Happiness is harder to define, but it has to do with inner peace, real relationships, purpose. And do you have inner peace?" "I'm starting to, ever since I came back to you." In the car on the way back to the neighborhood, Mrs. Martha was deep in thought. "Grant William," she finally said, "can I give you a suggestion?" Of course, Mom. You should use your company to help people like us. What do you mean? Build affordable housing, give jobs to people from the neighborhood, put together social programs. Use what you have to improve the lives of those in need. The suggestion planted a seed in Grant Williams' mind. He had never thought about using his business resources for genuine social projects, only the obligatory cause marketing campaigns that were common in the corporate world. You think that would make a difference? Son, you have power, money, connections. If you don't use that to help those in need, what's the point of having all of it? Over the following weeks, Grant William began exploring ways to implement his mother's suggestion. He studied affordable housing projects, researched job training programs, and talked to non-profits that worked in underserved areas. When he presented his first ideas to Mrs. Martha, she was thrilled. "Now you're thinking the way I raised you," she said proudly. "I always taught you that those who have more should help those who have less." "You really did always teach me that," Grant William recalled. "Guess I forgot along the way." "You didn't forget. You just set it aside for a while, but those things stay in your heart forever." The first project Grant William developed was the construction of a small housing complex right in Mrs. Martha's neighborhood. He used cheaper but efficient building techniques, hired local labor, and sold the homes at affordable prices. "Mom," he said one day, "I want you to pick one of the new houses to live in." "Why?" "Because they're bigger, more comfortable, and you deserve something better after all that time in the little house." Mrs. Martha thought for a moment. "What about my current little house?" "I can renovate it and rent it out to another family. Then it's settled, but with one condition." "What's that?" "The new house has to have room for you too, a bedroom that's yours, for when you want to stay over, instead of driving all the way back to Beverly Hills." The offer touched Grant William deeply. His mother was offering a shared home, a rebuilt family. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely, you're my son. Sons always have a place in their mother's house." The move into the new house marked a new phase in their relationship. Grant Williams started sleeping in the neighborhood 2 or 3 times a week, building a routine that balanced his business responsibilities with his rebuilt family life. The nights at home with Mrs. Martha became the most precious moments of his week. They had dinner together, watched television, talked about the day's events, and gradually recovered decades of lost closeness. "Son," she said one night, while they washed the dishes together, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, Mom." "Do you ever think about getting married again?" "I don't know." "Why?" "Because an empty house isn't good for anyone." "And you're already 45 years old." 50, Mom." "Wow, how time has passed. 50 years. It's time to think about really starting a family." "But I already have a family. I have you." "That's different, Grant William. You need a companion, maybe children." The conversation made him reflect on aspects of life he had neglected for years. Since the divorce, he'd had superficial relationships, always prioritizing work over lasting emotional bonds. "Would you like to have grandchildren?" he asked. "Every grandparent would like to have grandchildren, but only if it's with the right person, son. Not just any woman will do." "What do you mean?" "It has to be someone who understands our life, who accepts where you came from, who doesn't look down on simple folks." Grant William realized his mother was right. Any future relationship would have to include and accept Mrs. Martha as an integral part of his life. "And what if I don't find anyone like that?" "You will. Good people exist everywhere. You just need to be open to finding them." A few weeks later, something happened that changed Grant Williams' perspective on relationships. A young architect named Claire Bennett came to the neighborhood to do a study on the social impact of the housing project he had developed. Grant William met her while working at the stand with Mrs. Martha. Claire was interviewing residents and shopkeepers for her academic research on housing projects and community development. "Excuse me," she said, approaching the stand. "Have you lived here long?" "I've lived here for over 10 years, Mrs. Martha replied kindly, "and this is my son who is becoming part of the community again." "How interesting," Claire commented, taking notes. "Could you give me your impressions of the affordable housing project that was built here?" Grant William was curious about what kind of information she was looking for. "Why do you ask?" "I'm doing a master's degree in social architecture, researching how housing projects impact existing communities." "And what's your impression so far?" asked Mrs. Martha. "Quite positive, actually. Usually these projects are done without consulting the community, but this one seems to have been different." Grant William was intrigued by her perspective. Different how? Well, they hired local labor, respected the neighborhood's architecture, offered truly affordable prices. It seems like whoever designed it knows the reality of the people who live here. Mrs. Martha looked at Grant William with a proud smile. Sometimes someone who comes from a place knows better how to improve it. During the conversation, Grant William was impressed by Claire's social sensitivity and her genuine understanding of housing issues. She showed neither condescension nor romanticization of poverty, just scientific and human interest in effective solutions. "Do you know the developer responsible for the project?" she asked. Grant William hesitated for a moment, then decided to be honest. "Yes. Actually, I'm him." Claire looked at him surprised. "You're Grant William Harrison?" "Yes, I am." "Wow. You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "More executive, I don't know. Out of touch with reality. Most developers who work with affordable housing have never set foot in a community." "I grew up in a community like this one," Grant William explained. "I only came back home after many years." His honesty seemed to impress Claire positively. They talked for over an hour about the project, about urban development, and about the real needs of peripheral communities. "Claire," said Mrs. Martha as the conversation came to an end, "would you like to have dinner with us? I make a delicious pasta." "I'd love to, but I don't want to impose." "It's no bother at all. Grant William, tell the girl she's welcome." Grant William smiled. "It would be a pleasure, Claire. My mother really makes the best pasta in New York City." During dinner, Grant William learned that Claire had grown up in a lower middle-class family in upstate New York. She had studied architecture on a scholarship and was genuinely interested in using her profession to improve the quality of life for underprivileged people. "I've always dreamed of working with social housing," she explained, "but most opportunities are in construction companies that do superficial projects just to meet legal requirements." "And you'd like to work on more meaningful projects?" asked Grant William. "Of course, but it's hard to find business people who are genuinely interested in social impact rather than just profit." Grant William and Mrs. Martha exchanged glances. An interesting opportunity was emerging. "Claire," said Grant William, "would you like to see my company? Maybe we can develop more social projects together." "Really? You'd hire someone specifically for social projects?" "Why not? I have resources, you have specialized knowledge, and my mother constantly reminds me that we should use what we have to help those in need." Mrs. Martha smiled with satisfaction. "Son, this girl has a good head, and a good heart too." Over the following weeks, Grant William and Claire began working together on developing new housing projects. The professional partnership proved productive. She brought technical knowledge and social awareness. He offered financial resources and business experience. More important than the professional partnership, however, was the personal relationship that gradually developed between them. Claire regularly visited Mrs. Martha's house, helped at the food stand on weekends, and showed genuine interest in the community's life. "Grant William," said Mrs. Martha one night after Claire had left, "this girl is special." "Why do you say that?" "Because she likes you for who you are, not for what you have. And she likes me too, without any pretense." Grant William had noticed the same thing. Claire treated him the same way whether they were at the food stand or at the corporate office. To her, both facets of his life were equally valid and interesting. "Mum," he said, "I think I'm falling in love with her." "And her with you." "I don't know. How can I find out?" Mrs. Martha laughed. "Son, you can run $1 million company, but you can't tell when a woman is interested in you. It's different. In business, people are clear about their intentions. In love, you pay attention to the little gestures, the way she looks at you, how she smiles when you arrive, how she worries when you're tired." Grant William began to observe Claire's behavior more closely, and he realized his mother was right. There were signs of interest and affection he hadn't noticed before. The decisive moment came on a rainy afternoon when they were working together at the office. Claire had stayed late helping Grant William finalize the proposal for a new housing project. "Done," she said, saving the file on the computer. "I think it turned out well." "It turned out great," agreed Grant William. "Thank you for staying late." "It was a pleasure. I like working on things that really matter." When she stood up to leave, Grant William felt an impulse not to let her go. "Claire," he said, "would you like to have dinner with me? Not for work, just because I'd enjoy your company." She smiled tenderly. "I was wondering when you were going to ask me. Was it that obvious?" "It was obvious that you wanted to ask, but you were scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared of ruining our professional partnership, maybe." "And you? Don't you have that fear?" "I do, but I'm more afraid of letting the chance slip away to get to know the man who can be a businessman in the morning and a pot pie vendor in the afternoon." They had dinner at a simple restaurant, talking about their lives, their dreams, their fears. Grant William talked about the years of emotional loneliness during the time he denied his origins. Claire talked about the difficulty of holding on to social ideals in a business world that is often predatory. "You know what impresses me most about you," she said during dessert. "What?" "The courage to admit you were wrong and completely change your life." "I didn't completely change. I just rearranged my priorities." "It's much more than that. You deconstructed a persona that took decades to build. Few people have that kind of courage." "It wasn't courage. It was necessity. I was dying inside living that false life. And now? Now I'm starting to really live." When Grant William got home that night, Mrs. Martha was still awake watching TV. "How was dinner?" she asked with a mischievous smile. "It was really good, Mum." "Just really good?" Grant William laughed. "It was wonderful. Claire is an incredible person." "And are you going to see her again?" "I am, tomorrow actually. We're presenting our project proposal to the city. I'm talking about personal meetings, not professional ones." "I think so. I hope so." Mrs. Martha got up and kissed her son on the forehead. "I'm happy for you, Grant William. You deserve to be truly loved." Over the following months, the relationship between Grant William and Claire deepened gradually. She became part of the family routine, having dinner with them several times a week, helping Mrs. Martha in the kitchen, taking part in the company's social projects. "Grant William," said Mrs. Martha one morning, "do you intend to marry Claire?" "I'm thinking about it. Why do you ask?" "Because you've been together for 6 months now, and a woman of her worth can't wait forever. Do you think she's waiting?" "I think she's wondering what your intentions are, and in my day, a man with serious intentions didn't take long to declare them." Grant William realized his mother was right. He and Claire had developed a deep and stable relationship, but he had never talked about the future or commitment. "Mum, can I ask you a favor?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Help me pick out an engagement ring." Mrs. Martha's smile was radiant. "Now you're talking. When do you want to go?" "Today, if you can." The expedition to buy the ring was one of the most enjoyable experiences Grant William had had with his mother since they were reunited. Mrs. Martha examined every option carefully, asked about the quality of the stones, negotiated prices, and finally approved an elegant but not flashy ring. "This one suits her," said Mrs. Martha with certainty. "Beautiful, but not showy, just like Claire herself." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely, and if she doesn't like it, you can come back and exchange it." Grant William planned the proposal to take place in the very community where they had met. He arranged a dinner at the new house he shared with Mrs. Martha, invited some beloved neighbors, and prepared everything with care. Claire arrived without suspecting a thing. When she saw the set table and the guests, she asked, "What's the special occasion?" "You'll find out," said Grant William nervously. During dinner, he told everyone the story of how he had been reunited with his mother and how it had changed his life. He talked about how meeting Claire had been the second great transformation in recent years. "Claire," he finally said, standing up and picking up the ring box, "you taught me that it's possible to use professional success to build something greater than profit. You taught me that true love accepts the whole person, with all their contradictions and complexities. Grant William, she murmured, realizing where the conversation was going. Will you marry me? Not just me, but my family, my story, our projects together. Tears streamed down Claire's face when she saw the ring. Yes, she said simply. Of course, yes. The small room burst into applause. Mrs. Martha cried with emotion, Mr. Arthur shouted congratulations, and the other neighbors celebrated as if it were a victory for the entire community. Claire, said Mrs. Martha, hugging her future daughter-in-law, officially welcome to the family. Now you're going to have to put up with my mother-in-law ways. It will be an honor, Mrs. Martha. The wedding of Grant William and Claire took place 6 months later, in a simple but moving ceremony at St. Joseph's Church, the same one where Grant William had slept on his first nights, disguised as a beggar. The party took place on the street itself, with tables spread out between the houses, food prepared by the residents and music played by a local band. It was the complete opposite of the sophisticated corporate events Grant William used to attend, but it was infinitely more meaningful. Son, said Mrs. Martha during the couple's first dance, now our family is truly complete. Thank you for giving me a second chance, Mom. Thank you for coming home. 2 years after the wedding, Claire became pregnant. The news filled Mrs. Martha with a joy she hadn't felt in decades. I'm going to be a grandmother, she announced proudly to the whole neighborhood. My grandson will be born here in the neighborhood and will grow up knowing where he comes from. Or granddaughter, Grant William corrected. Or granddaughter. Either way, what matters is that the child will have real roots. During Claire's pregnancy, Grant William reflected a lot on what kind of father he wanted to be. He had grown up without a father figure, raised only by Mrs. Martha, and feared repeating the pattern of abandonment that he himself had perpetuated. Mom, he said one night, do you think I'll be a good father? Why do you ask? Because I abandoned you. I'm afraid of doing the same thing to my child. Grant William, you weren't a father when you abandoned me. You were an irresponsible young man who thought the world owed him something. Now you're a mature man who has learned the value of family. But what if I make the same mistakes? You won't. You know why? Why? Because now you know the price of making those mistakes, and because you're no longer alone, you have a wife who won't let you lose yourself again. When the baby was born, a girl named Martha Claire Harrison, Mrs. Martha held her granddaughter in her arms and cried as she hadn't cried in years. She's perfect, she whispered, just like you when you were a baby. You remember me as a baby. I remember every detail. You cried a lot, but when you stopped crying, you had the sweetest smile in the world. Grant William looked at his daughter sleeping in her grandmother's arms and felt an indescribable emotion. He was seeing 3 generations of his family together for the first time in his adult life. Mom, he said, I promise my daughter will never know the abandonment I made you feel. She never will, because you've learned that family is the only thing that truly matters in life. The years that followed were the happiest of Grant William's life. His company thrived specifically because of its focus on social projects, which proved to be not only meaningful on a human level, but also financially profitable. Claire became his official partner, specializing in sustainable urban development. Mrs. Martha continued working at her stand, but now with the help of other family members. Grant William had hired 2 distant cousins to help her, ensuring the business kept running even when she wanted to rest. Mum, said Grant William on his 55th birthday, don't you want to retire? Retire to do what? Stay home watching TV? To play with your granddaughter, travel, rest. Son, work isn't a punishment when you like what you do. I like cooking for people. I like talking with the neighbors. I like being part of the community's life. Grant William understood that his mother had found purpose and identity in her work. It wasn't a matter of financial need, but of personal fulfillment. Then keep working as long as you want, he said. But do you promise that if you get tired or need anything, you'll tell me? I promise. But you also promise you won't try to convince me to stop. I promise. That same year, Grant William made a decision that surprised even Claire. He announced he was handing over the company's presidency to her, keeping only a stake in the company and an advisory role. "Why?" asked Claire. "The company is doing so well." "Exactly because of that. You're younger, more idealistic, you have more energy to expand our social projects, and I want to have more time with my family." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. I spent 50 years learning that success without family is empty. I don't want to make the same mistake again." Mrs. Martha was proud of her son's decision. "Now you're showing that you really learned life's lessons." Grant William began dividing his time between occasional work at the company, helping out at Mrs. Martha's stand, and taking care of his young daughter. It was a completely different routine from anything he had experienced before, but infinitely more satisfying. "Dad," said little Martha one day when she was already 4 years old, "why does Grandma work on the street?" "Because Grandma likes cooking for people and taking care of the neighbors." "And why do you sometimes work with her?" "Because I like spending time with Grandma and learning from her." "And why does Mommy work in the big building?" Grant William laughed at his daughter's curiosity. "Because Mommy knows how to build houses for people to live in." "And you? What do you know how to do?" The question made him think. For decades, his identity had been defined by corporate titles and financial wealth. Now, what did he really know how to do? "I know how to take care of our family," he finally answered. "And I know how to help other people have happy families, too." The answer seemed to satisfy the child, but it made Grant William reflect on how his definition of success had completely changed. On the 10th anniversary of his reunion with Mrs. Martha, Grant William organized a party in the community to celebrate not only the date, but everything that had been built during those years. 10 years ago," he said in a speech to the gathered neighbors, "I came back to this neighborhood lost and ashamed. Today I stand here grateful and proud." "Grateful for what?" someone from the crowd shouted. "Grateful for having a mother who forgave me when I didn't deserve forgiveness. Grateful for having a community that accepted me even knowing where I came from. Grateful for having found true love right here, where I began my life." Mrs. Martha, now 82 years old but still active and sharp, stood up to speak. "My son learned something that a lot of rich people never learn," she said with a firm voice. "He learned that family can't be bought with money. He learned that love has no price. And he learned that home isn't the place where you have the most comfort, but the place where you have the most love." The applause was deafening. Grant William hugged his mother, his wife, and his daughter, feeling that he had finally arrived where he had always been meant to be. "Mom," he whispered in Mrs. Martha's ear, "thank you for waiting for me." "Children aren't waited for," she replied. "Children are loved, and love isn't in a hurry, and it isn't in a hurry." 5 years later, when Mrs. Martha turned 87, she finally decided to slow down her work pace. Not because she was sick or unable, but because she wanted to dedicate more time to her granddaughter, who was now 9 years old. "Grant William," she said, "I think it's time to pass the stall on to someone else." "Are you sure?" "I am. I want to teach my granddaughter to cook, tell her all the family stories, help her with her homework." "And are you going to miss the work?" "I will. But I won't miss having a purpose. My purpose now is being a full-time grandmother." The transition of the stall was handled carefully. Grant William bought the equipment and passed the business on to a young entrepreneur from the neighborhood, making sure Mrs. Martha could visit and help whenever she wanted. "It feels strange," she commented on her first day without work. "I can't remember the last time I spent an entire day at home." "Are you regretting it?" "No. I'm just curious about what it'll be like to have free time." "Anything you want to do, Mum. The world is yours now." Mrs. Martha spent the first months of retirement rediscovering hobbies she had given up decades ago. She took up crocheting again, learned to care for plants, and above all, devoted herself intensely to her granddaughter's upbringing. "Grandma," little Martha said one day, "tell me what it was like when you were young." "Oh, my dear, that's going to be a very long story." "I like long stories." And Mrs. Martha began to tell it. She talked about her own poor childhood in the countryside, about how she met Grant William's father, about how she raised her son alone, about the years of abandonment, about the miraculous reunion. And you forgave Grandpa Grant even though he left you alone? Yes, I did, my dear. Why? Because when you truly love someone, forgiving isn't hard. It's automatic. And what if I do something bad when I grow up? I'll forgive you too, because Grandma never stops loving, no matter what happens. These conversations between grandmother and granddaughter became a daily tradition. Grant William and Claire often heard the two of them talking in the kitchen, Mrs. Martha passing on values and wisdom, the child absorbing every word with complete attention. Our daughter is going to grow up with an emotional foundation we never had, Claire commented one day. What do you mean? She's going to grow up knowing she's loved unconditionally, that she has a safe place in the world, that family comes before everything. Do you think we did the right thing raising her here in the neighborhood, instead of in a more upscale area? I'm sure of it. She's learning real values. She's seeing what real life is like. She's growing up without prejudices. Grant William agreed. His daughter played with children from every social class, spoke naturally with people from different backgrounds, and showed a natural empathy that had taken him decades to develop. On the 15th anniversary of the reunion, Mrs. Martha made a declaration that surprised the whole family. Grant William, Claire, my granddaughter, she said during dinner, I need to say something important. What is it, Mum? Asked Grant William, worried. These last 15 years have been the happiest of my life, not just because you came back, but because you came back changed, better, more human. Where are you going with this? I'm going with this. If I died today, I would die completely fulfilled. Mom, don't say things like that. I need to say this, son. I need you to understand that you've given me more love and happiness than I ever dreamed of having. No matter how many years I have left, they have already been the best of my life. Claire and Grant William exchanged glances, moved by the depth of her words. Grandma, said little Martha, you're never going to die, are you? Everyone dies one day, my dear. But those who love and are loved never die completely. They stay forever in the hearts of those left behind. Then you'll stay in my heart forever. Forever and one more day. The conversation marked a moment of emotional maturity for the whole family. They began to cherish even more every day together, every conversation, every shared moment. Grant William, now 58 years old, found himself in the role of family patriarch, responsible for keeping together the values that Mrs. Martha had built. It was a responsibility he accepted with pride and determination. Claire, he said one night, do you think our daughter will go through the same conflicts I did about social background? I don't think so. She's growing up knowing where she comes from, proud of her family, without internal contradictions about her identity. And if she wants to pursue a business career, she'll pursue it knowing that success only has value when shared with those we love. Grant William smiled. His daughter would have the opportunities he had, but with the emotional foundation he hadn't had. It was the perfect combination for a full and meaningful life. When little Martha turned 12, she herself brought up a topic that surprised her parents. Dad, Mom, she said during lunch, I want to help with your company. What do you mean, sweetheart? Asked Claire. I want to learn about the social projects. I want to visit the construction sites. I want to understand how you help families. Grant William was moved. Why does that interest you? Because Grandma always says that those who have more should help those who have less. And you have a company that does that. I want to learn. Are you sure? It's hard work, sometimes complicated. I'm sure. I want to understand how to turn money into good for other people. The maturity of his 12-year-old daughter impressed Grant William. She had internalized social values naturally, without having to go through the internal conflicts he had faced. Over the following months, little Martha began accompanying her parents on visits to the company's projects. She asked intelligent questions, carefully observed how the beneficiary families reacted to the new homes, and showed genuine concern for the well-being of the people served. Dad, she said after a visit to a housing complex, why do some people have so much and others so little? That's a complicated question, sweetheart. It has to do with opportunities, education, luck, sometimes injustices in the system, and how can we make it fairer? By doing exactly what we're doing, using our resources to create opportunities for those who haven't had the same chances as us. And does it work? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but it's always worth trying. His daughter's social curiosity filled Grant William with pride. She was naturally developing the social awareness that had taken him decades to acquire. On the 18th anniversary of the reunion with Mrs. Martha, Grant William organized a special celebration. He invited all the people who had been part of the journey, old neighbors, company employees, families benefited by the social projects, and above all, his own family. 18 years ago, he said in his speech, I returned to this neighborhood as a stranger in disguise. Today I'm here as a son, a father, a husband, and a proud member of this community. And what's the greatest lesson you've learned? Someone in the audience shouted. Grant William looked at Mrs. Martha, now 90 years old but still lucid and present. I learned that family is the only wealth that truly matters. I learned that unconditional love exists and that it's never too late to start over. And I learned that our only obligation in life is to leave the world a little better than we found it. The applause lasted several minutes. Grant William hugged his mother, knowing that every moment by her side was an unexpected gift. Mom, he whispered, thank you for teaching me what really matters in life. Thank you for learning, she replied. Not every child learns. At that moment, surrounded by his family and community, Grant William felt completely fulfilled. He had come a long way from the ambitious young man who had abandoned his mother in pursuit of material wealth. Now he was a man who had found true wealth, in relationships, in unconditional love, in the possibility of using his resources to improve the lives of others. The story that had begun with abandonment and sorrow had transformed into a narrative of redemption, forgiveness, and love. Grant William knew he still had much to live, much to learn, and much to contribute. But he also knew that no matter what the future brought, he would never be alone again. He had a family that loved him, a community that had welcomed him, and a purpose that gave meaning to each day. And Mrs. Martha, looking at her son, her daughter-in-law and her granddaughter gathered around her, knew that her life had fulfilled its greater purpose. She had raised a son who had lost his way, but had managed to find the path back home. She had watched the family rebuild itself on stronger foundations than before, and she was certain that the love she had planted would continue to bloom in the generations to come. Time would keep moving forward. The seasons would come and go. People would grow older. But what had been built between them, forgiveness, unconditional love, family unity, that would be eternal. It was the kind of wealth that no economic crisis could destroy, no tragedy could diminish, no time could erase. Grant William had finally understood that he had come home not just geographically, but emotionally. And home, he had discovered, wasn't a place. It was a feeling. It was the certainty of belonging, of being loved, of having an important role in the lives of the people who mattered. In the simplicity of that working-class community, he had found the emotional sophistication that all his business achievements had failed to provide. And he knew that no matter where life took him from then on, he would always carry with him the most important lesson Mrs. Martha had taught him. That in the end, what really counts isn't what we accumulate, but what we share. It isn't where we arrive, but who we arrive with. It isn't the success we achieve, but the love we cultivate. The story of the millionaire who disguised himself as a beggar to find his mother again had become the story of a family that had rediscovered its own values, and that was a wealth that would last forever. End of story. And now, dear listener, we want to know your opinion about this moving story. What did you think of Grant Williams' journey? Do you think he made the right decisions? Have you ever experienced a similar situation in your own family? Leave your thoughts and experiences in the comments. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories like this one. Your participation is very important to us.